Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you joined us for this unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers while we enjoy award winning wine. So, why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. Since I'm the only winemaker in the world that's actually captured a serial killer. And no, I didn't use wine. This is real true crime and real wine. Each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, my co host, and the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, which you can hear on all of the popular platforms, she joins me each week and we take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from around the world, all while enjoying our favorite glass of wine. I've got my Casaro wine today. It's our Montepulciano, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And as always, make sure you tell the other true crime lovers in your circle about our podcast. Have them tune in on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Salute. Now, in this episode, we're going to take you on a journey profiling into the life and crimes of Aileen Wuornos, a lifelong prostitute who turned the tables on her tricks. I want to welcome in my co-host, Brandy Diamond. And Brandy, this is a very different serial killer case. Not only is the serial killer a female, only about 12% of the serial killer population, but this was a female who not just murdered for financial gain. Again, the majority of female serial killers, she actually hated men.
Yes, she did. She did not shy away from the fact of why she murdered these men. She was, John, like you said, a little different, a predatory killer. So we're going to talk about some of her crimes. But yes, she did not like men. She did not shy away from that. Even after her arrest, she verbally discussed her crimes and why she did them. So Aileen is definitely a unique serial killer case when it comes to women.
And you may know the movie, the popular, 2003 movie Monster, Academy Award-winning film. But we're really going to get into profiling the actual crimes of this serial killer.
Okay, John. So we're going to talk about her early life. We always talk about this, when nature versus nurture, when all of that comes together, then something happens with these serial killers. But early on, we want to look at, what was her childhood and life like? We know that Aileen was abandoned as a child. Her father, who was actually she didn't know her dad, but he was a diagnosed schizophrenic and did commit suicide. So were some of her tendencies, did she get them from him? But Diane Wuornos, her mother, and Leo, she was 14 years old. Her mother was 14 when she got married. The father was 18. She did have an older sibling, but we do see the schizophrenic, the suicide, the child abandonment. What do we know now in the early life and how this is profiling her for future state?
Yeah, divorced parents. Again, she never did meet her dad, but her dad was in prison for kidnapping and rape. So her dad was a criminal, did have mental health issues, did commit suicide. So certainly that probably figures in a little bit to the DNA, to the genes, to her makeup. Being abandoned as a child is traumatic for any kid. She moved in with her grandparents, but really didn't even know that they were her grandparents until age 11. And certainly it was not a good move, a good relationship with the grandparents. Her grandfather was abusive. Her grandmother was an alcoholic. And so she had issues from the very, very beginning that kind of led into we start checking
Mhm.
those box on these serial killers. We do
Yeah.
know that she was sexually assaulted and physically abused by her grandfather. She stated later on that she was forced to strip naked in front of him before receiving the beatings.
Mm.
We heard, but it wasn't really confirmed that maybe there was some incest with her older brother Keith, but we do know she was very, very close to Keith. We're going to talk about that later because after he passed away, it really, really went downhill from her. So here we've got a child that's abandoned at birth, given to grandparents, grandparents that are alcoholics, that are physically abusive, sexually abusive. She's raped as a child, and by age 11. Now, Brandy, you and I both have got children. We've had
Yep.
little girls. It's hard for me to fathom this. And you and I talk about the background of these killers, and some of them horrific backgrounds. Others, you're like, what happened? The background was really normal. She had probably as bad of a background, a childhood as anyone that I've ever seen. The beatings, stripped naked, the abuse, the rape, the incest. And by age 11, she already started working as a prostitute,
Mm.
if you can believe it, at school, trading sex for cigarettes, drugs, and unfortunately, food.
Ugh.
By by 14, we know that she was raped by her grandfather's 60-year-old pedophile friend. She became pregnant, had a son, and then was forced to give it up for adoption. So, I mean, this runs the gamut. She's abandoned by her mother, who was married at 14. She has to abandon her own child. She's forced to abandon it, but it's a child from rape from a pedophile. I
Oh,
mean,
Jesus.
absolute horrible, horrible upbringing and tons of both childhood trauma and abuse.
Yeah, like you said, these ages. I mean, 11, John. I mean, I have an 11-year-old. I can't. And for food, I mean, the abuse goes much further than the sexual and the physical, and just survival mode. That's what I think of a child who is just trying to survive, the trauma that she's already gone through, that she's continuing to go through. And yet, I see this picture that you have of her with a smile on her face. And it's just heartbreaking. I mean, she eventually does some terrible things to people, but to know that this was a child and she was going through this, it's just it's very hard to wrap your head around this.
At one point, maybe she was a happy child, but I don't
Mhm.
know when, and
Yeah,
I don't know at what age. If she's being raped
I
and
know.
abused and tortured and turns to prostitution at age 11,
I
I,
mean, you got to
I
hear that. You got to see that somewhere, right? I mean, there has to be something that's instilled in her at that young age to know what even that is, to be able to know that she can offer that. I don't know. It is hard because my gosh, we're talking about 11. She's doing this. So when did, this probably went on her whole adolescent life, John.
It literally went on her entire life, and
Yeah.
that's why, many of these women we see falling into prostitution, and some at a very early age. But I'm not sure if I've heard it earlier than 11 years old. Now, in 1971, her grandmother dies, and we already know the grandfather is abusing her. We already know his friends are having sex with her and raping her. But even with that, maybe the grandmother provided some level of protection in some way. I don't know. Did it knock the abuse down from 10 times a week to 5 times? I don't know. But after her grandmother died in 1971, it seemed that she really spiraled out of control. At
Uh-huh.
15, she was evicted by her grandfather. And by her own admission, she lived in woods and abandoned cars that she would find, and she began working full time as a prostitute at age 15. She had
Wow.
already basically been doing it for 4 years. Can you imagine? She ran away from multiple foster homes and was the ward of the state numerous times after her mother's death, grandmother's death. But she basically lived on the road, out of cars from 15 on, surviving, getting food, getting the basics as a prostitute.
Survival, I mean, it's doing whatever I guess she can to, I mean, 15, you're kicked out of, I mean, where do you, I mean, she's that's all she knows. I mean, that's really all she knows. And yeah, just, running away, being wards of the state, right? I mean, that brings up a whole nother level of trauma and being, put in separate different homes. I mean, my gosh, just some of this trauma that she had been experiencing and, made it a way of life at 15 years old. Okay, John. So we like to tell everyone on every episode what makes our show just a bit different is your profiling background, what the profiling of serial killers are, are we checking some boxes here? So, what do we know about her and what boxes are you checking at this point?
Well, there's a whole lot, unfortunately. Like you and I said, sometimes there's very few, but with her, there's a bunch. Substance abuser, certainly not just her, but her parents and her grandparents. Abusive family members, certainly she was abandoned by her mother, never knew her dad. Her grandparents were abusive. Her grandfather was sexually abusive, sexually assaulted her, had friends rape her. Mental health issues, some of those could have been inherited, from her father who had schizophrenia and, killed himself after being in prison for rape. So mental health issues certainly checks that box. Social skills, man, when you start being a prostitute at 11, she used her skills to survive, but certainly was on the outside looking in socially and did have a history of all kinds of petty crimes. We know that additionally, she had an explosive temper from a very young age. Physically, with a lot of these serial killers, there is some physical, I wouldn't say deformity, maybe not even abnormality.
Mhm.
Ed Kemper being as tall and big as he was, and we've certainly seen different serial killers. Some of them have a lisp, or some of them, are not the most attractive in the world. Maybe really bad acne. She
Yeah.
actually had some scars on her face from a childhood fire. What really stuck out to me is she attempted suicide. Her dad died of it. She
Hmm.
attempted it 6 times between the ages of 14 and 22. Now you got to remember, she was pregnant at 14, forced to give up her baby. She was thrown out at 15. She was working as a full-time prostitute. She basically was homeless. So you can see, how
Yeah.
horrible that is. But in 1978, she actually shot herself in the stomach but survived that incident. So, with many of these serial killers, we see feeble suicide attempts.
Mhm.
Shooting yourself in the stomach with a gun is not what I would call a feeble suicide attempt.
No, and painful.
Yep.
And she survived. I mean, survived 6 times after 6 attempts. Um, wow. So we've checked a lot of boxes. And John, God, I think of this age of 14 to 22. And, I mean, and to be living a life where you feel like a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I mean, to her that could be painless, right? Compared to what she was dealing with in her everyday life. Just
Oh,
Wow.
yeah, she was
Just
in and out
terrible to see.
of juvenile detention. She was in and
Yeah.
out of foster homes. She
Yeah.
constantly ran away. She dropped out of school, of course, at a very, very early age. I think 14, 15. She had already
Mhm.
dropped out of school. And, by a very early age, she was showing signs of multiple mental health disorders like bipolar disorder
Mhm.
and PTSD,
Yeah.
trauma from what she experienced as a young person.
So we've got all of these additional red flags. And now let's start to talk about the timeline of the violent crimes. So it starts in 1974, John, in Colorado. So she gets a DUI, disorderly conduct, and she fired a pistol from the vehicle and then failed to appear in that court hearing.
Yep, yep, and they issued a warrant for that. We also saw in Michigan she was charged with assault. Remember earlier I talked about her fits of the temper,
Mhm.
violent temper, and several people described that. Well, we saw that in Michigan in '76. She got mad in a bar and threw a cue ball at a bartender's head
Ugh.
and was charged with assault for doing that. In 1981, it was an armed robbery. She stole $35 in cigarettes from the store and spent 13 months in prison for that crime. She forged checks. We know that. She was caught with a revolver and ammo. She stole cars. She resisted arrest. So she's got multiple offenses here, and even assault again after that of her girlfriend, and accused assault of a bus driver. So she is got angry outbursts. She's mad. She said she hated humans, pretty
Ugh.
broad, but she said she hated humans, and I think that
Mhm.
manifested itself in her series of crimes. And we haven't even got to murder yet.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of the mental disorders, right, that we're dealing with that not getting medicated for could probably have something to do with the outbursts. Even maybe undiagnosed as a child. And so we're seeing the assault, fighting back, right? Forging the checks, again, survival, resisting arrest, firing a weapon, then being caught with a weapon. So definitely starting to see that. And like you said, we haven't even got into, the murder yet. But John, she did get a little break. She did inherit $10,000 from her brother's life insurance in 1976. You mentioned earlier that this was sort of a turning point for her after his death.
Yeah, she inherited the money, but quickly squandered it away on cars and luxuries that no way could she ever afford in her life. She turned to prostitution at 11 to feed herself. And we know she was homeless at 15 and was prostituting just to get food. And some of the things that we saw that she sold, she was at the basic survival level. So she inherited the money, but quickly lost all of it. She hitchhiked to Florida in 1976 and continued that transient lifestyle. She did get married briefly to a 69-year-old, but it was annulled after 6 weeks because she assaulted the guy with his own cane. She was involved in multiple bar fights, had a restraining order placed on her, and so that marriage, like I said, lasted all of 9 weeks. She did meet a person that she had a relationship with, Tyra Moore, and it was a pretty long relationship
Okay.
in her standards, at least about 4.5 years. But she was very, very possessive during the entire time, and she supported them by prostituting.
Mhm.
Moore eventually was implicated in some of her crimes, but never tried. Because she was granted immunity. So Eileen Wuornos, her life basically from the veriest early days was that of a prostitute, and a prostitute that was a victim, a prostitute that had been raped, a prostitute that had been beaten, a prostitute that lived a very, very hard life.
Mhm.
But then she transitions into a prostitute that's not going to take it anymore and is going to turn the tables. She started working in the sex trade at 11, full time at 15. She walked up and down the highways. That was her main area, especially I-75 in Florida. She was a transient her entire life. She never had a house or an apartment. She lived in motels and cars. She was very, very poor. And we've heard some serial killers talk about this, the desperate poverty that they live in, and she's living from trick to trick, sometimes just to feed herself.
Right.
And then her world starts to shift in the fact that she decides she's not going to take it anymore. She says if men who have been victimizing her entire life can be predators, why can't she also be a predator?
Okay, John. So we're going to talk about her very first murder, which was the murder of Richard Charles Mallory, 51 years old, owned an electronics store. Now, this guy, there was some controversy around this because he was, prior to this, he was convicted of rape. So was he a violent criminal himself? Of course. Then he meets Aileen Wuornos, but he picks her up. She claims he drives her to an abandoned area where he beat, raped, and sodomized her. And this is her defense, right? She shot him 3 to 4 times with a 22, 2 fatal shots to the lung. She stole his Cadillac, which she then abandoned in Daytona. They discover the body, John, December 13th of 1989, naked in the woods off I-95, decomposed. So not the best character, but he meets Aileen Wuornos, and this is considered her first murder.
Yeah, and so was this a situation where she's getting fed up? She's
Yep.
tired of these guys. She's tired of men who have abused her and raped her and stolen her life. And then she runs into a trick that's a predator too. So is this just a perfect storm of predator, him, meeting up and coming predator, her, and she won? And when we kind of look at the crime scene, we figure out really quickly here, we don't know his side of it. We know what she says happened, but
Right.
we also know she was the apex predator in this situation. She brought a gun. She had access to the gun. She shot him 3 to 4 times with the weapon. She stole his car. Again, robbery is going to be a part of this MO that we see. She killed him on November 30th. He wasn't found to December 13th. She stayed in a remote area, but really interesting. And this is kind of where the predatory aspect gets in. She stripped him naked. He was naked when he was found. So this isn't like a fight in a car, outside a car. He pulls a gun, tries to kill her. She grabs the gun away and shoots him. She shot him. She killed him. She stripped him naked and left him in this wooded junkyard off of I-95, where when he was found, his body was already decomposing. So from the very first murder here, we certainly see something that doesn't go along the lines of, oh, I was just going to turn a trick. He tried killing me and it went bad. She stole
Right.
his car, right?
Yeah.
She took his car. She stripped him naked and left him out there in that junkyard. So a lot of things from this very first murder, we can see this predator has emerged in her.
Yeah, and also, John, taking the clothes off, right? Laying the body out. I mean, if we were talking about a male doing this to a female, that's we hear about that. That seems like a pretty common thing. And so, is there, is she trying to show
But
shame? Is she
well,
trying to show guilt? Right when he's found, I'm
or
curious.
or is she trying to show that she's in control and has power? Things that we usually attribute to men. So if we
Yes,
found a naked female, then we could say, wow, this may be a sex crime or part of a sex crime. But now we have a naked male
right.
that she stripped down. So what is she trying to tell us by that? Not only do I have the power to kill him and steal his car, but I can humiliate him
Mhm.
and leave him naked in this junkyard to be found weeks later. Very, very fascinating from the very first crime, from the very first murder. She's got a long criminal history.
Yeah, and John, I'm curious, do you think this was something that she thought about for many, many years? I mean, is this something, do you think she just went into this prepared with a gun, knew what she was going to do? I mean, you talked about a lot of evolution in this first victim with her.
Yeah, I don't know if it was many years. She probably had this hatred for men since what? She was a child,
Child?
right?
Yeah.
Since she was maybe first raped. Maybe this hatred kept building and building and building. But certainly, I think she had prepared herself and knew what she was going to do. There are too many signs that this was a very organized type crime.
All right, so let's talk about the second victim, David Andrew Spears, 47 years old, machinery operator, was from Sarasota. So he is actually missing on May 19th of 1990. The body is then found June 1st. Again, John, naked along US 19, shot 6 times in the torso. So again, we have the murder weapon. The truck was actually
Well,
abandoned,
wait a
and then
second.
yeah.
Brandy, so what about the 6 shots? Tell me about that. What does that tell us?
Oh, that tells me that that's anger and overkill. So
Yep.
that's what she's angry, upset. I don't see in this case, John, that she talks about him doing something to her. Maybe you have a little background on that, whether or not she accused him of the same things that she accused the first victim of. But badly decomposed when found in the brush on the side of the road.
Yeah, initially that was her defense overall. These guys attacked her. It was self-defense. She had to do something, but you nailed it. Shot 6 times in the torso, overkill. Right? She
Right.
shot the victim multiple times. She then took his truck. She abandoned the truck later on. She left him out in the brush where his body could decompose. She again stripped him. He was found naked. So that MO is going to stay consistent throughout each of these murders. But to me, it's showing a power, a control, and a predatory type behavior we rarely see in female serial killers.
Yeah, I was trying to think of any serial killer or really any female murderer that stripped her victims.
Right. Right.
I don't know if I can think of any just off the top of my head. I'm sure there's some, but I that's very unusual.
Yeah. So again, it's showing, hey, I've got control over you. I can not only kill you, I can humiliate you because when they find you, you're going to be naked. If they find you, your body's going to be decomposing. I'm going to leave you to the animals. You are going to have as horrible a death as I can possibly do.
So, John, between November of 89 and November of 90, there were actually 7 victims. Um, so robbed all of them. We talked about the financial gain in this, right? Stole the vehicles and some of them. Bodies dumped in isolated areas, like you said, and the motive was always self-defense. Anything you want to talk about with the MO, with the 7 victims for a female between this? So we're talking about 1 year. 1 year, 7 victims.
Yeah, that's a lot of victims. That means that she's out there. She has this rage. She's got this anger. There is a financial component, which is
Mhm.
typical in female serial killers. But again, she's trying to survive. She's turning tricks for money to pay for that night's motel room. She's turning tricks for money to pay for the drugs that she needs. She's turning tricks for money to get food for her and her girlfriend. Right.
Right.
So we see that she's out here constantly turning tricks. Now, why does she kill these seven? Is there some precipitating incident? Do they try to do something? Initially, she said yes, right? Initially,
Right.
her defense was, well, they were trying to rape me, which was very inconsistent with the evidence. Later, she said, I robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again.
Mhm.
So was this her temper coming out? Remember, we've seen this temper all through her young adult life, her teen years. We heard about the violent temper. We saw the assaults, the throwing the cue ball at the bartender, everything. So now at this time, are we finally seeing that for whatever reason, when she gets in a situation with these seven individuals, she's not taking it anymore. She's going to kill him. She's going to strip them naked. She's going to humiliate them. And then
Mhm.
she's going to rob them of their possessions, because it wasn't just their vehicles that she took. She took other things and would take them to pawn shops and get money for them. And some of the pawn shop items ended up being key evidence against her.
Well, she doesn't. Now, we talked about overkill with the second victim, but really the overkill was with the third victim as well, shot 9 times. So, John, not only the overkill, anger, right? I see this is anger towards someone who she's probably known for 20 minutes, right? So, a lot of anger there. So, Charles Edmund Carkston, 40 years old, rodeo worker, May 31st of 1990. The body is found June 6th, again, naked, wrapped in a blanket this time, found off of I-75, shot 9 times, like I mentioned, pawned the gun. You just mentioned the pawn shops,
Yep.
took the vehicle. And of course, the crime scene is in the remote field with high decomposition.
Yeah. So what's interesting this time, why'd she wrap him in a blanket?
I thought about that too. I thought the first thing I thought of was somebody covering someone's face if they don't want to know, or if they know the person, right? You see that, but you typically don't see that necessarily in stranger. And so I don't know. Do
Yeah.
you have an idea?
No, very interesting. The only thing I can think of, she did shoot him 9 times, and maybe at some point she even thought, this is a little bit of overkill. Maybe I
Ah,
overdid it. Maybe she felt a little ashamed. I hate to say that, because these killers have no remorse and no empathy. But for some reason, she did wrap him in a blanket. But she did strip him naked prior to
mhm.
that. So
Yes.
I don't know. I'm not sure at this point. But yeah, 9 times she was going to make sure that he was dead. He was not leaving that crime scene.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the victimology. We have men, right? We said age 40 to 65. This is 7 victims in a year period. We talked about her young life, growing into adolescent, becoming a prostitute very young. Would you consider her very organized, John? I see repetitive behavior in her action, bringing the gun, leaving them naked, leaving them in remote areas. When they're found, they're decomposed. Anything you want to add on the victimology?
Yeah, certainly. They're white males in about the same age range, 40 to 65. They're tricks, Johns, whatever you want to call it, that were picking her up to take her somewhere to have sex. She worked the highway. She knew the remote areas. She knew right where to go. She could direct him to isolated areas where she could shoot him, kill him, rob him, strip him naked, and then leave him out there in a field. I think that's very, very organized. Um, Physical evidence. She took items from the victims and pawned the items, so she's leaving a trail behind. And she's taken the vehicle, using the vehicle, or attempting to sell the vehicle, or using it and then abandoning it. So we're seeing a very, very consistent MO with this killer. The question is that's perplexing on this one. In order to survive, she's prostituting to survive, right? To
Right.
get food, to get drugs, to get, that's how she's making, using prostitution to make money to live day to day. That pretty much tells us that nearly every day, if not multiple times a day, she's out there turning tricks. And
Yep.
yet she only kills 7 guys over a year period.
Hmm.
So, what is it about that 7? Did she see something in them? Did they resemble somebody? Were their mannerisms, their behavior, their characteristics maybe like someone that had raped her in the past, somebody that had beat her in the past? Why these 7? So, I think that's kind of the question that I would have when I start looking at the totality of the cases here. Because if there were 7 that she killed, one, were there others we don't know about? But how many tricks is she
Hmm.
going to turn in a year's period of time?
Right.
Several hundred, and yet she kills 7. So that'd be my observation at this point.
And I would agree with that. I think there was probably a trigger for her with these particular men. I think maybe she was a lot smarter than people gave her credit for. I think she probably knew if she continued to do that with all of them, she would probably eventually be caught. I think she's thinking about not getting caught. I think she's kind of put herself in survival mode. And maybe I think they were just chosen by random. I mean, I think if there was more of a consistent behavior with her, we would have seen a lot more victims. But I'm not sure if killing was necessarily her motive with every time she met with a John. So I would be curious on what actually triggered her to murder these men.
Yeah, and maybe there were many others that she robbed,
Mm,
took their property, wallets,
yes.
watches, money, and they
Hmm.
weren't going to call the police, right?
That's right.
They were
Yep.
lucky to get away with their life and only lose whatever possessions she took. So she might have killed 7, robbed 100, and then earned money off of hundreds more.
All right. So now we've got our fourth victim, Peter Abraham Seams, 65 years old, a retired seaman. So he went missing on June 7th of 1990. John, the body was never found. Car abandoned on July the 4th. Um, Now her palm print is actually found on the door. There were signs of struggles inside of the vehicle with blood in the interior. So what do we know about this victim?
So this victim, this is very, very interesting because this is the one homicide that we tied her to that she was never convicted of because the body was never found. The car, however, her and her girlfriend Moore were driving in the car when they had an accident, when they crashed it in Orange Springs. So there was a witness that put both of them in the car. They also found her palm print inside the car and scenes of a struggle and blood and damage in the car. So it's very interesting that the one person that she wasn't convicted of killing is really giving us the hard evidence that ties us to this whole series of murders here.
It's very interesting. Um, John, did they ever you said that the girlfriend is eventually tied to some of these crimes or maybe being an accomplice of some of them. Do we know if she played a significant part or knew what Aileen was actually doing? Um, I would assume she did. I'm trying to remember in the actual movie what it's not always accurate the perception that the actors are playing, but is she an accomplice at this point?
I think she's an accomplice by the legal definition. I'm sure
Okay,
she knows what's going on. The money's not falling out of the sky.
right.
Her girlfriend's leaving for it. She's coming back, and she comes back with drugs, with food, with money. She comes back with watches and wallets and other things. We know that she accompanied her to the pawn shop on different occasions. So she's certainly an accomplice at this point, but I don't think she was with her at any of the murder scenes or anything like that. Now, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, it wouldn't be True Crime and Wine without the wine, would it? We feature one of our favorite Casaro wines. And as always, you can buy them online at casarowines.com. We'll ship it right to your house, and you can enjoy our fine wines while listening to our podcast and enjoying along with Brandy and myself. This week, I've got a glass of Montepulciano. It's one of our biggest award winners as far as international competitions. It's a dry red wine, just bursting with flavor and wonderful aroma. The Montepulciano, I love pairing it with steaks, with prime rib. It holds up to just about any meal you could throw at it. So try our Montepulciano or any one of our other fine Casaro wines. You can order at casarowines.com. Salud.
Okay, John. So before we get into victim number 5, I just want to talk about the profiling and the victimology MO and the body disposal of what Aileen, the consistent behavior she's showing. So we know that white males are the victims, 40 to 65 years old. MO, taken to remote locations, offered sex. Again, they're not here to tell their side of the story. She says that rape, sodomization was going on. They are shot multiple times with handguns. So that is her MO of weapon of choice. She robs her victims, takes their cars, maybe takes their jewelry, goes to pawn shops, money. The body disposable, they're dumped. They're stripped of their clothing. So again, pretty consistent behavior with all of these victims.
Yeah, her MO really doesn't change.
Mhm.
Once we get to the first victim there, it stays very, very consistent throughout. So it also, kind of makes you wonder on prior engagements with men before the first murder, was she practicing? We know she was
Yeah.
plying her trade, and maybe she had ripped off other people before, robbed them. Very, very common in the field of prostitution. So I just see it as a continuing escalation of her unfortunate life as a prostitute since age 11.
All right. So let's talk about victim number 5, Troy Eugene Burris, 50 years old, sausage salesman from Ocala, Florida, missing since July 31st, 1990. So the body is found August the 4th, again, shot twice in the torso. The delivery truck was missing that he was driving. And then the crime scene was, sort of a logging area, picnic spot. And found by the family, John. A family was maybe going for a picnic and enjoying this area and then found the body.
Yeah, I think it was a roadside kind of area, off of the highway, off the beaten path, pretty scenic. And the family was just going to have a picnic there, like other
Mhm.
families, and found the body. With all of this, one of the things that we haven't talked about yet, she strips him, leaves him naked to just stay out there and decompose. She doesn't try to cover him up. She's not trying to hide him in any way. And that's why I think these bodies are found pretty quickly. For almost every single victim, it's just a week or two. And we know with some serial killers we've covered, they're not found for months, and others, they're not found for decades. So some killers are really trying to cover up their crime, get away with it, dispose of the body. But to me, it's almost in stripping them naked and leaving them out in the open, even
Yeah.
though they're in an isolated area. She doesn't care if they're found. And if they're found, they're humiliated even more because they were out trying to have sex, got killed, and stripped and left for dead. So I think that's part of this power, this control, and this predatory
Mhm.
MO that we're seeing in her that is very, very rare.
Well, and I also think if you're going to strip them naked, I mean, I look at some of these pictures of the crime scenes and I see a lot of brush. There may have been, she may have had the ability to cover them up with brush, right, at some point. But then you're stripping them naked because you want them to be humiliated. You used that word earlier. So then, and again, you're a prostitute, right? So I don't see her carrying, it's easy to hide a gun, but it's not really easy to hide a tarp, right? Or hide other things you want to bring to murder someone. So I think she knew that, she was limited on what she could carry on herself without suspicion arising. But then why take the time to cover them up if you're just going to strip them naked?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not like the killers, like married murderers that we covered, they carried
Mm,
shovels with them,
right.
crowbars, that, they'd at least try to cover up the body a little bit.
Hmm.
She's getting it. She's, picture this. She's standing on the highway. She's flagging them down. They know she's a prostitute. She's getting in their vehicle. So it's what she has on her body and what she can carry, which isn't a whole lot, like you said. But
Yeah.
even in the best of conditions, she's not really trying to cover it up, right? She's
No.
really not trying to hide the bodies. It's almost like, well, if they're found, they're found. I don't care. And they'll be humiliated even more.
Well, she does that to her sixth victim, Charles Richard Dick Humphreys, 56 years old, John, retired Air Force major, ex police chief, child abuse investigator. I mean, talk about someone who gave their life to civil service, right? And
And
then
someone
does
that
have,
should know better,
yeah,
right?
so like, right, like, and puts themselves in this situation. I've got a lot of thoughts and questions about that. But his body is found on September the 12th, but this time the body is clothed, but he is shot 7 times, head and torso both. So again, seeing a little bit of overkill here. So what do you think about him being clothed?
Well, one of the things that I'm thinking about is he had a fairly sophisticated level of training. He wasn't a rodeo worker or a salesman like we've seen in the past. This
Yeah.
guy, a retired Air Force major, police chief, longtime investigator. So he had probably some technical skills, some tactical skills. And that's why I think we see shot 7 times in the head and the torso. He could have resisted in such a way that she felt, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, maybe I can't get away with this one. Maybe I'm really, I've got to do whatever I can. This guy is, maybe the most sophisticated of anybody from a physical, from a fighting, from a tactical standpoint of anybody that she's killed. And maybe she simply doesn't take the time to strip him. We
Yeah.
don't know the circumstances. He was found very quickly the very next day. It was a rural roadside where he was found, but he was reported missing very quickly by his wife. So, being law enforcement, I would say, the scenario probably plays out. The wife calls in, hey, my husband's gone missing. He's a former chief. I need
Mhm.
everybody out looking for him. That's the last place I saw him. Here's his car. Here's his license plate. She might have known, hey, they're going to send everybody to come find this guy. And I
Yeah.
need to get out of here as quickly as I can. She grew up on the streets. She knows life on the streets. She knows life and law enforcement and how law enforcement takes care of each other. So it simply could have been, I got out of here with my life. I beat this guy that had tactical experience and training. I had to shoot him multiple times, but I'm getting out of here before I get caught.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree that leaving him clothed, she didn't have time. There was a rush and a hurry in this one, I think. Um, and again, we have the overkill. I wonder if she knew. I would assume she didn't know him, but I wonder if at some point he either had a weapon or there was something in the car that showed that he may have been in law enforcement at some point.
His
Um,
badge and his wallet. If
his
she tried
badge.
tried
Yep.
taking his wallet, I'm sure he had his badge on him, his ID.
Good point.
He could have identified himself. Hey, you don't want to do
Right.
this. I'm a cop. Do you know what's going to happen if you
Mhm.
become a cop killer? So there's all kinds of scenarios that could have
Mhm.
played out here. Him being law enforcement.
So we talked about earlier about, being a predatory killer, right? Men being predatory killers, typically not seen in females. So what are some things that our audience should know about this? What are we seeing in her that we wouldn't see typically in a female killer?
Yeah, certainly. There's several things. We see the desperation, we see the poverty, we see that she's living day to day, and that's why she's turning tricks, as we said, for the food, for the lodging, for the drugs, the alcohol, everything that she needs. We see these fits of rage, right?
Right.
These explosions of rage. We see killing really as a form of survival for her. Not only does she have a hatred of men, but she thinks I have to kill them to survive, and I deserve it, and they deserve it. Right? They have
Right.
been preying on me. They men have been preying on me for my whole life. And
Yep.
so now it's my turn to prey on them. So this is really rare. This type of predatory behavior in females. With female serial killers, we've seen them that have been involved in prostitution. We've seen them that have been involved with killing children for money. We've seen them killing boarders at boarding houses for money. So financial gain is always a part of it, but
Hmm.
she has this deep hatred for men, and she's using this hatred to fuel this really kind of rare predatory behavior. We always say in the show, Brandy, we cover unique and fascinating serial killers, and this was a very, very unique killer from the get-go.
Yeah. And I really, and I know there are different movies made about different cases like this, but there has been a fascination with her, John. I would use that word, from books written to this movie being made. It wins an Academy Award. Charlize Theron, wins for Best Actress. I mean, it. You see Aileen Wuornos. I wonder, would people know who she is? And I feel like we hear about her even now and with some of these crimes, and there is a fascination in her. She's a woman. Most of them don't do this type of thing, right? So there is a fascination in people wanting to, what makes a woman do this, right? What brings a woman to do something like this? And like you always say, don't try to get in their heads. We'll never actually know.
Well, we certainly see the precursors. With her,
Yes.
they were there. And so
Yes.
we can understand this. And as she says, years later in prison, I hated humans forever. I hated She hated everybody. She hated herself. She tried killing herself on 6 different occasions. So she hated herself. She hated the human race. She especially hated men. And this is
Mhm.
how it manifested.
So we're on the seventh victim, John Walter Gino Antonio, about 62 years old, trucker, found from Merritt Island. November 19th, 1990 is this when this takes place. So his partially naked body is found near Dixie County, again, logging road, a very rural, remote area, probably just maybe also, like you said, maybe off the highway where truckers stop, where families might pull over and have some lunch. But he's shot 4 times, 3 times in the back, 1 time in the head. And he was dead less than a day, John, when he is found. And again, crime scene is off an isolated trail. So this is her last known victim. Anything you want to add about Walter?
Now, very similar to the last one. He was found a day later, right?
Yeah,
And this
yeah.
one, so we really know now she is in the mode of just disposing the bodies, just dumping them, getting rid of them. If they're found, they're found. I don't care about that because these last two have been found very, very quickly after the murder. So she is into this mode. Hey, I'm going to get rid of them. The geographic profiling, very, very similar with all the victims in this case. She picked them up mostly along I-75, and you could kind of look at a map of Florida, very small area where she's picking up her victims. She's taking them these remote locations. So she's out there working the highway. She's probably been to that remote location 10 times, 100 times with other tricks. She knows exactly where to go, exactly when to pull the weapon, kill them, rob them, dump the body, take the vehicle. Very, very organized. And the geographic area where she feels comfortable is where she's been working since she was 15. She's been
Yes.
working these same highways, same rest stops, same truck stops, same everything for her entire life. So she knows this is her comfort zone. She's not traveling the country, right? She's
Right.
not getting in the truck and going to one side of the country and going to another. She feels safe and comfortable coming, picking them up on the highway, taking them to these isolated areas, killing them, and then going back and doing it again and doing it again and doing it again.
Yeah, we saw this, I feel like, in the chessboard killer. So, very isolated areas, very comfortable in one set area. I mean, I'm looking at this strip of Florida where the activity was taking place. I mean, again, a very small, area for someone to be committing these types of crimes. But I tell people, John, we always tell people, and I actually posted this earlier, people need to start profiling along with us. You have a profiling book available for our listeners to grab and really kind of go through this. Your audience, does this when you do these live, and it really is interesting. And I think people will start to pick up on patterns of behavior. And I think human behavior is just interesting anyway, but really people can kind of follow this along and start to maybe think about human nature, right? A nature versus nurture. But that geographic profiling is just important as the MO and other pieces as you're profiling these crimes.
Right. No, you're exactly right. And the beginning of the end kind of started. Remember that car wreck we talked about on July 4th? She had
Mm-hmm.
killed that individual. I think Seams was his name. And
Yep.
she had killed him, and his body was never found. But she was found in his car. She had a wreck. Her and Moore were together, and they were involved in a car crash in his stolen car. Well,
Oh.
that started the dominoes falling there because witnesses saw the wreck. They described both women. The police made sketches of both women. They identified the car as belonging to the missing, supposedly deceased man. They never did find his body. So they started checking pawn shops and came up with items that were stolen from him
Uh,
at local pawn shops. They then pulled the pawn shop receipts, and what was on the receipts? Aileen's fingerprints
uh,
that were also found in the vehicle, whose description also matched the sketch. So police were able to say, we have a missing person, we have a stolen vehicle, we have a vehicle that was involved in a wreck. We've got someone that had their property stolen and it was pawned at a pawn shop by the suspect who was driving the vehicle, and the witnesses saw. So
yeah.
it started to fall apart really, really quickly there.
Yeah, a domino effect. And they were just picking up evidence one piece after another. And that, John, then leads to her arrest in January of 1991. So, what do we know about the day of her arrest?
Well, let me tell you, you got to remember that long criminal history we talked about?
Yeah.
She had actually gone alias on several different warrants. So at the time she was committing these crimes, there were actually warrants out for her arrest for previous crimes, had nothing to do with the murder. But now law enforcement is starting to piece together. They've got a missing guy. They've got a known prostitute. They have a known drug addict, known felon, firearms convictions, right? So they're painting this picture of her. They've got multiple victims now up and down I-75, all that had their cars stolen. So they're pretty sure not only do they have a serial killer, but she's the serial killer. But they need a little bit more evidence. So what they do is, since they've identified her, they actually pull one of the older warrants. They go to a biker bar where they set up a stakeout waiting for her to attend. They hear from folks this is one of her favorite haunts, the Last Resort Biker Bar in Volusia County. And she goes there and the net collapses on her. They arrest her for her outstanding warrant. Now, at the same time, they're looking for Moore. They can't figure out where Moore is. They find that Moore fled back to her home state in Pennsylvania. So the next day, they arrest Moore. So now they've got Aileen and they've got Moore both. And Moore says, I didn't do anything. I was never there. I didn't kill anyone. And the cops say, fine. If you wear a wire and we get you to solicit a confession, we will give you full immunity, because they don't believe she was there for any of the murders, right? At most, maybe she's an accomplice after the fact. Maybe she's involved in some of the pawning of stolen items. Very, very minor crimes compared to a serial killer. So Moore agrees to wear the wire. She calls her for several days and tries to get her to talk. Now, she's calling her in jail, right? And she's saying, I'm so afraid. I'm so afraid they're going to arrest me. I'm going to die in prison, or they're going to give me the death penalty, whatever. Says this over and over until Aileen admits on the wiretap, I did it. But she says it was self-defense. They all tried killing me. Because remember, that was her first story. She ended up changing it later. But her first story was, oh, well, I wouldn't have killed him. It was all in self-defense. But on January 16th, so less than, a week or about a week later, they have her confessing to these murders on the wiretap. And Moore's given full immunity.
Wow. Well, okay, so then the trial comes up, John, in 1992. Does Moore testify in this trial?
Yeah, she actually does. She testifies against her, what she knows about it. They do. This is Richard Mallory. He was the convicted rapist. So Aileen said, hey, he tried raping me, but they didn't allow his past crimes to be introduced into evidence. And her attorney kept appealing on this point, was turned down, though. And because of Moore's testimony, she was convicted of his murder and sentenced to death. So very, very rare that a female serial killer is sentenced to death.
Yeah, I believe there's only, I'd have to go check my numbers again, but I think there is only 9 women on Texas death row, to 9 or 11. Not many. I mean,
No,
it
not
is
many.
very unusual. And also even more unusual to have the actual execution go forward. We see a lot of appeals nowadays. We see different innocence projects picking cases up, getting delayed like this, but she's given additional sentences on top of this, John.
Well, because she finally realizes, after her appeals were kind of exhausted, she said she wanted to get right with God. Now, she did say, hey, I'm going to tell you exactly what I told you in the first trial. He did try to rape me. He was a rapist. So it's kind of ironic that she was a victim of rape almost her entire life, that she just happened to get one night with a trick that was a rapist, and she could have been perfectly truthful in the fact that he tried raping her, and then she defended herself and killed him.
Yep.
All of that could have been exactly true, which meant she probably wouldn't have got convicted and gotten the death penalty. But by
No.
this point, she's like, all right, I'm resigned to the fact I'm going to make myself right with God. And she pleads guilty, actually, no contest, to the murders of Humphreys, Burris, and Spears. So 3 additional murders, and she's given 3 additional death sentences. So,
Wow.
I mean, she pleaded guilty to those and got 3 more death sentences.
Okay, but in 1992, she also pleads guilty to the murder of Carcadon and received the 5th death sentence.
Yep.
In February of 1993, she pleads guilty to Antonio's murder and receives the 6th death sentence. Although she is never charged with Seam's murder, even though that was the vehicle she was driving when the car wrecked and she's ultimately caught,
Yeah, so
since his body was never found. Yeah,
another ironic twist, right?
so
The
ironic.
one
Yes,
murder that she's
crazy.
not convicted of
I
is
know.
what led to her entire downfall, and it had nothing to do with the body or the murder. It was that she was involved in a car crash in the
Yes.
stolen car. So,
Karma.
yeah, another
Karma.
ironic twist there in this case. A very, very unusual case. The victims, as we said, all white males, 40 to 65. She shot all of them with a handgun, some of them 7 times, 9 times in the
Yep.
torso, in the head. She left them out there to just dumped them out there, stripped them naked, and left them to decompose. And so this is just a very unusual predatory type behavior for a woman. When they started, doing some research on her, a little bit later on, they did diagnose her with bipolar disorder. They diagnosed her with PTSD. They said that's where those fits of anger came from, the temper, the rage. She was a rare female serial killer. She had a mistrust of men. She viewed them as predators, and she wanted to be the ultimate predator. She spent her entire life basically in and out of the criminal justice system, working as a prostitute. She was a thief, a robber, and a murderer. And maybe in her mind, the men not only got what they deserved, but they were symbols for all men in her life, right?
Yeah, I would
That,
agree with that.
yeah, that the people she killed were symbolic of the
Had to be.
grandfather that abused her and raped her, the pedophile that raped her, everybody, every male in her life that took advantage of her, beat her, raped her, that's where that anger came from.
Well, and I wanted to talk about her sexuality. She did have a girlfriend at the time. She is, bisexual, and killings, she said was revenge for exploitation of the sex work she was doing. Right. And then also that irrational mental behavior. I think of like the outburst she talked about, but she kind of did this in prison as well.
The outburst?
Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
just the irrational behavior. And just and again, like using, it's hard, John. Gosh, there is a level of sympathy you do have as we talk about these things, because we look at that childhood and we look at the abuse she suffered, and we think of, the how powerful our mind is, right? And when did this turn for her? I mean, we're talking about prostitution at 11 years old. So it's hard not to go and have a little bit of heart for her. And then you think about, was this mental diagnosis so later on, and maybe she suffered with this through the trauma, John, that she suffered at 9, 8, 7,
Right.
10 years old. And so it's just hard to kind of pinpoint some of this when you're talking about it in the adulthood.
Yeah, you've got this whole convergence of
Yeah.
mental health issues, PTSD, bipolar issues, drug dependency, alcoholism, rape. I mean,
I know.
She is one of these people that unfortunately had little chance from the get-go.
Yeah.
I mean, she really had little chance from the very beginning. In 2001, she dropped all of her appeals. She said she was done, right? She
Yeah.
wanted to get right with God. She was executed by lethal injection October 9th, 2002. Her last words, "I'll be back," like Independence Day with Jesus. I read her last words over and over again. Didn't make a lot of sense, everything going on her head, right? You
Yeah.
just can't you can't try to make sense of it. She didn't have a final meal. She just had a cup of coffee. They did send her ashes to Michigan, where she had spent some time and everything. And
Mm.
at that time, she was only the 10th woman in the U.S. to be executed after 1976. So it is kind of rare to have
Yes.
a female serial killer, and a female serial killer who's executed. And again, that's what we want to do is we want to bring you these unique and fascinating cases. And I think when we start peeling back the layers of the life of Aileen Wuornos, we can see trauma and abuse and neglect, hatred that manifests itself in serial killing. As we put a cork in this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to remind all of our listeners that you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at JJ True Crime and Wine. At JJ True Crime and Wine. You can catch the podcast, of course, on Apple, on Spotify, and on YouTube. And we'd appreciate it if you send it to all your friends and family and true crime lovers out there. And as always, if you want to join us with some great award-winning Casaro wines, you can order that at casarowines.com. CASSARO wines.com. And I think that about wraps up our business for today. And I want to thank, of course, my co-host, Brandy Diamond. As always, she's wonderful. And thank you, Brandy, for joining me on this journey. And our producer. We couldn't do it without you, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for making this show possible. And we'll see you on the next episode of True Crime and Wine as we present a serial killer who was linked to 6 murders, but recently, because of advances in DNA, confessed to over 2 dozen more. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us on True Crime and Wine. Salute.